A very good morning to all of you. We have been dealing with the study of poetry by Matthew Arnold. So, in a previous lecture, we understood what Matthew Arnold is trying to say regarding the analysis, regarding the examination of poetry. He tells us how poetry can be understood, studied, analyzed, and he comes up with three methods. He suggests three methods. One of them he names that real estimate, then the second one is historical estimate, and the third one is personal estimate. Among these three estimates, he gives priority to real estimates, which is a kind of unbiased, unprejudiced evaluation of literature. Poetry means, again, I every now and then keep on telling you that in criticism we understand poetry as literature. It is a broader term, and according to Arnold, real estimate is the unbiased and unprejudiced evaluation with a fine balance between historical context and innovation. At the same time, it also talks about the creativity of the individual poet. And then he talks about historical estimate as well, which dominates the study of literature or poetry. Of course, it includes value judgment, and it talks about innovation and creativity. But given the importance to the historical context, value judgment and innovation and creativity become, especially innovation, they talk about innovation, newness, and creativity are less important in this approach. Further, he refers to personal estimate, which is full of personal and cognitive biases of the individual reader. And this reading is dependent on the reader's preferences and tastes, readers' likes and dislikes. So this is the problem. And then we went on talking about the inspiration and imitation, the terms that he uses. Arnold argued that poets are often so inspired or moved by the classical works of poetry that they often tend to borrow their content or ideas many times. And it is an issue with for the poets who cannot detach themselves from their favorite classics. So you can take examples of Dryden, Alexander Pope, and others. He talks about some examples from British literature. Then I had introduced the term touchstone method. We were here at this point. I told you something about the term touchstone. Touchstone uh, is a concept, which means it's a kind of stone which is used to turn anything into gold, everything into gold, I can say. So the Marathi word for it is parisparsha. So he borrowed this term from actually Longinus concept of true sublimity. Sublimity means or sublime means of high quality. So he uses this particular term, touchstone method, by taking inspiration from Longinus. You are well familiar with Longinus. He was one of the Roman critics. So the concept of true sublimity, sublimity means high quality. Uh, he uses this term to say that the time-tested classics act as the touchstone to judge all other works of poetry. So touchstone method means what? By using the term touchstone, Arnold says that the time-tested classics. Time-tested classics mean the classics which have been for here in this world for a long period of time, since ancient times, can act as the touchstone to judge all other works of poetry. So it can become a kind of standard, a kind of criteria against which we can judge all other works of literature. Of course, by using touchstone method, there is no warranty, or we cannot warrant a need to have an exact replica of such content. Means it does not mean suppose we use touchstone method, we follow the ancients, we follow the classics. It does not ensure that it will be the exact replication or reproduction of the content and quality. Content means the subject matter, and the quality of those works can be further evaluated. That does not ensure that actually. So Arnold suggests certain touchstones like Homer, John Milton, William Shakespeare, and the German writer Dante. So he thinks that, no, Italian writer, I mean to say, not German writer. So these are some of the examples of the authors, of the writers who can be touchstones. So we understood what is the meaning of the term touchstone here in this context of a discussion. So it is the judging of other works of poetry by comparing or by keeping these particular authors and their works as icons, as role models. So these particular exponents of poetry, exponent means the one who use poetry as the effective medium to give outlet to their emotions, to give outlet to their thoughts, etc. So these particular exponents of poetry were able to enhance the experience of reading poetry through the matter and style. Means what exactly when you read Homer, the Greek writer, his tragedies, and then Milton. John Milton was one of the great writers, English writers of Puritan age after William Shakespeare. He's well known for his Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, the epics. He's well known for his Lycidas as well, the long narrative poetry. Elegy, actually, it is an elegy. So John Milton, whatever John Milton wrote can be a model, role model for others. Then he takes an example of William Shakespeare as well. William Shakespeare's dramas, plays, his writing can be a role model for the writers. And even the Italian poet and writer Dante can also be the role model. Okay, this is how uh, readers can enhance their experience of reading poetry through reading the matter and style of all these writers. If at all you want to understand great literature, first of all, you should be familiar with the writing of Homer, Milton, Shakespeare, etc. Of course, these are a few names. These are the few names that he mentions. There are many others, okay? And if you at all you want to understand literature in a better manner, if at all you want to enjoy literature, first you should be acquainted with these great writers and their works. That's what Arnold thinks. He believes that best poems have a kernel of truth in their matter. So there is a kernel of truth. Means what? There is, you might be knowing the fruit. A fruit has its kernel, a center, which has got a kind of juice, which we enjoy eating. So these poems have a kind of kernel of truth in their matter. We enjoy that. We learn truth from their subject matters, their themes. At the same time, these poems have a sense of singular flair in their construction or manner. Poems, again, should be understood as any kind of literature. In case of William Shakespeare, you can understand him as a poet and as a dramatist. Of course, he uses, poetic drama. John Milton was a poet. Homer was a dramatist, a playwright. So what we come across in their writing is a kernel of truth in their subject matter. And there is a sense of singular flair. There is a kind of, quality, creativity, talent in their construction or in their manner of writing. Construction means here, in the way of composing a poem, in their ways of composing or writing a drama. There is a kind of talent, and we understand that. So, if at all you want to become a good critic, if at all you want to judge a piece of literature, it is imperative to apply such a method judiciously and rigorously. Okay? If at all you want to judge any piece of poem, any piece of a work of literature, you have to apply touchstone method judiciously. Judiciously means just like an advocate. The way a judge applies his knowledge of law to understand the matter, and rigorously. Rigorously means with a kind of force, energy, with all your might, you should apply this method as a critic. So, what will be the outcome there? You have to apply this in order to develop the ability to find real estimates of poetry. So, why do we need to apply the stone method? To find real estimates of poetry. So, we have understood three methods: real estimates, historic estimates, and personal estimates. And in real estimates, we have understood that it is unbiased. If at all you want to understand literature in an unbiased and unprejudiced manner, if you at all you want to understand the innovativeness in literature, if at all you want to understand the talent of the author, you need to apply this particular method. So in case the reader is unable to find the high value while evaluating a classic, then it is his or her shortcoming. So this is to be underlined. You have to keep it in your mind. If you do not find any value in while evaluating a classical literature, then it is not the fault with the work. Rather, it is the fault with you people. You means the readers, because they have their limitations in understanding this literature. They do not have the perspective, the ability to understand literature. You might be knowing that there are two kinds of abilities, the poetic ability and poetic sensibility. The readers must have that sensibility to understand a poem. A poet has that poetic ability. He can create a poem, but it is up to the reader to understand it. Once the reader, the writer, the poet writes, it is the responsibility of the reader to interpret it, to understand it. And if the reader is unable to understand that classic, then the fault lies with the reader itself. It is the shortcoming of the reader, not of the poems. That's what he says. Then he analyzes some of the English classics after talking about the touchstone method. Arnaud analyzes some of the English classics. So he highlights the impact of French poets, especially from northern France, on their English contemporaries. English counterparts means what? English poets. Counterparts means the people belonging from the same field. You should understand the use of language. French poets and English poets is a kind of repetition. To avoid that, you can say English counterparts. French poets and their means the contemporary English poets. So their poetry, French poetry, was dominated by romance. Romance means the subject matter dealing with love, etc. So they dealt with romance over serious and graver themes of human life. Means French poets of that period did not deal with the serious and graver. Graver means, again, there is the meaning of seriousness itself, very sad side of human life. They only talked about the jolly, happy side of human life. They talked about what love, romance, okay, then happiness, pleasure, etc. They didn't throw light on the serious and graver part of human life. And Arnold is full of praise for Geoffrey Chaucer. You might be knowing, you must have studied by now in paper one, that Geoffrey Chaucer was one of the greatest English writers of 15th century. He wrote between during that period, and he's considered to be the father of modern English poetry. After the Dark Ages, it was Chaucer who explored different ways of writing. So Arnold is full of praise for Geoffrey Chaucer, who, according to Arnold, wrote in liquid diction. Liquid diction means here a very spontaneous, a very good diction. Diction means vocabulary, language you mean to say, and was a great exponent of both content and style. Geoffrey Chaucer, according to Arnold, was a great exponent of content. Content means subject matter, themes, and style means manner, the way he wrote, the language he used to express his content. So Chaucer, according to Arnold, was a great exponent of content and style. He appreciates Chaucer for the use of the language, which was very much spontaneous, very much lively, we can say. So according to Arnold, Chaucer scores high on the real estimate. Means what? The estimates he has given in terms of innovativeness, in terms of creativity, in terms of subject matter. He scores high, but does not come to the level of a classical poet. So this has to be understood. Arnold does not give him the status of a classical poet like Homer, like Milton, or William Shakespeare, because he lacks seriousness of someone like Dante, Milton, and William Shakespeare. According to Arnold, Chaucer he was not a classical poet like Dante, Milton, and Shakespeare because he lacked the seriousness of these poets. So this is how he uses the three estimates by using touchstone method to judge Geoffrey Chaucer. He then considers Alexander Pope and John Dryden, the neoclassical or Augustan poets, writers. So he thinks that Pope and Dryden were the classical. Actually, he considers Pope and Dryden as classical prose of the Restoration period. He does not call them poets. He calls them classical prose of the Restoration period. I'm sure that you have studied this in a paper one. If you haven't studied, then you should study it seriously for preparing yourself not only for this forthcoming examination, but also for your SAT and NET examination. Focus on paper one and paper two and this paper as well for preparation. So he calls Gray, one more neoclassical or restoration writer, Thomas Gray, who is well known for his elegy written in Country Churchyard, or you must have studied a poem, an elegy on the ode on, I think, the death of my favorite cat, Selina. He calls Gray a classic but relegates Burns to the fortune of Chaucer. Thomas Gray, according to Arnold, is a classic, but Robert Burns is again just like Chaucer, non-serious. Because Chaucer and Burns lacked seriousness in their content, according to Arnold. Even though their verse contain both truth and great skill, still Arnold does not give them the classical status of classical poets. After talking about all these, he comes to his contemporaries. Means maybe romanticists, not contemporary exactly, but uh, the poets belonging to the nearer time period, we can say. He points out to the influence of personal estimates when judging the poets like Byron, Lord Byron, the poet belonging to second generation, then P.B. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and William Wordsworth, the poet of the first generation who started Romanticism with the publication of lyrical ballads. And he demits any judgment of their works because he thinks that there is a kind of personal estimate. His personal biases are there because they were very nearer to him. They were almost his contemporaries. Therefore, he does not talk much about these poets. So, after analyzing the English classics, English poets, Arnold claims since the classics works have been able to stand the test of time and longevity, they have an, I am sorry for the spelling over there, indwelling ability of self-conversation. Because they have the dwelling only, yeah, indwelling ability of self-conversation means inbuilt. They have the ability of self-conversation. Therefore, they could stand the test of time. Time passed, but still they remain classics because of their longevity and indwelling ability of self-conversation. So this ability is a function of the self-preserving and enduring nature of human beings. So this every work of art must have this ability for preserving themselves, for sustaining with time, to stand the test of time. Although time passes, they remain on this earth forever because of their quality. So this is how he suggests us the ways of studying poetry by applying estimates. So we talked about real estimate, we talked about historic estimates, and we talked about what we call this personal estimate. And then we went on talking about the touchstone method.